Hey guys, how are you? I hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I have yet another movie review, so I hope you find this one interesting. This movie is a crime thriller from South Korea, Korean language English subs, released in the year 2015, directed by Song Yong-ho, and this movie is called The Deal. So The Deal is set in South Korea. You've got this investigative police officer who is on the case of a serial killer who has just picked off his 7th victim. So the head of the police department is fed up. He says if you don't get results soon, you can find another job. So there's a lot of pressure under this guy, but that pressure is alleviated one day when there is a clue that he comes by chance, and that leads to the arrest of this serial killer. So he saved the day, he's getting all the accolades, he's feeling really good about himself, but that happiness is cut short when he realises that his sister has gone missing, and he believes that maybe she was one of the victims of this killer. So he's interrogating this killer. The killer is giving no information, much to his frustration, and so this policeman decides to team up with his sister's husband, who is equally as devastated, and they're going to try and exact some information from this serial killer in a non-law-abiding sense in order to try and get the whereabouts of their loved ones. So whether or not they can succeed in what they're trying to do is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Deal. I was very excited to see this film. Now it is South Korean and I really like the synopsis, and I thought if this movie was done in a typical South Korean fashion it would be a knockout, but unfortunately it comes nowhere near the expectation I had for it. It's because it was way too ambitious, and I actually thought it lacked confidence in its storytelling. Now I will say that doesn't come away that as positives. I thought the characters in this film were fantastic, especially the police officer and the sister's husband. I thought that they were completely grief-stricken, they were destroyed by grief. It shows you how destructive grief can be and how it can transform people into someone that they're not initially. And I love the connection that these two had. I thought I could invest my time in this situation. I hope that they crack the case. I hope they get the whereabouts of this guy's sister and this guy's wife. And it felt like a tragedy. It felt like an emotional sort of roller coaster where you've got these two guys who are doing things that they don't want to do, but they feel like they have to do it. And it shows you the lack of trust in the police department as well. So those two characters were good, but the person who really steals the show was the villain. Now this villain, he lacked emotion, he lacked compassion, and I just thought he had a very intimidating presence. Every time he was on screen he was chilling. Just by his mannerisms, just by his body language, you could feel that this guy was a psycho. And so he was the best villain I've seen in a very long time, but unfortunately it felt like this villain deserved a much better film, is because this movie, it does have a lot of things going on. And it takes a lot of skill to rein in all of that ambition, but unfortunately Song Yong-ho, he doesn't rein it all in, and it feels like a complete mess. So on one side you've got a very fascinating story about a serial killer, about this guy who's trying to find his sister, and a guy trying to find his wife, but then it goes into a gangster style of film. Now this gangster style of film, it is connected to some of the characters, but it felt like a completely different film. And when it feels like a completely different film, it feels like a distraction. It feels like it's completely out of place. And this is what completely halts the progression of this film, is that on one side you've got this very thrilling atmosphere, on the other side you've got a fairly dull atmosphere, and you feel like it doesn't evolve the film into one whole movie. It feels like two separate parts, and unfortunately the part on this side is so much better on the part on this side, so every time you go into the depth of the other element, you feel like you want to come back to the serial killer moment, because this part of the movie is not really capturing your interest as much as it really should. So that's a massive problem, and it just feels like two separate movies that don't combine together well at all. And then you've also got the problem of the director holding your hand, pointing out everything that's going on. So for example, there is a clue that comes about, and then it goes into a very, very brief flashback in the past to show you what that clue is. It's basically pointing at it, it's holding your hand saying, this is exactly what is going on. It's not really showing any respect for the intelligence of the viewer. You know, the viewer could work this out themselves if you do it subtly enough, but when you're pointing out everything, it feels like the viewer doesn't really have any intelligence. They can't work it out for themselves, and so it does become a little bit frustrating. It's way too obvious. The movie needed a lot more subtlety than it did. And then you've got the overall sense of melodrama as well. So right at the end there's a lot of melodrama. It's trying to force the emotion to a point where once again you feel as though you don't have the intelligence. The director is saying, look, I'm worried about the intelligence of the viewer. They're not going to pick it up unless I make it completely obvious. So you cue the music, you cue the tears, and it's supposed to make you feel very sad, but because it's forcing it so much, you feel, okay, I'm not going to play this game. If you're going to insult my intelligence, then I'm not going to invest my interest in it. So you do disconnect yourself, and it does become a bit of disappointment by the time it finishes. So it is a violent movie, but the violent movie, the great villain, the good characters, they feel like they deserve so much better than the overall story and the way the story was told. It felt like the director didn't have the confidence to tell a story in a natural way, so he had to point out everything to make sure you got everything. But the problem is that the viewer does have intelligence, and we would have been able to pick up what was going on if it wasn't, even if it wasn't so blatantly obvious as to what the director was trying to do. So This is a movie that was definitely a bit of disappointment, nowhere near as good as the other South Korean films that I've seen recently, and as a result of that, I'm only going to give the deal 2.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching movies, and I'll see you later. Bye.